The pandemic has meant that the ways we work and think about work have changed, but we know that there are still barriers that mean disabled people, people with mental health conditions, and neurodivergent people continue to be disadvantaged at work in ways that non-disabled people aren't. This shows up in the employment gap, the pay gap, and the type of work that's available. At Barnwood, we wanted to use our influence to do something about it. We knew how the barriers showed up, but not exactly what these looked and felt like, or how we could support employers to dismantle them. Welcome to the Empowered Employers podcast. We are Barnwood Trust, and today we are speaking with a group of experts with lived experience of these barriers that make up a team of people who, alongside commercial employers, have supported the design of the campaign, Empowered Employers. This group of experts by lived experience have been meeting to discuss what we want employers to know, covering subjects such as flexible working, workplace adjustments, and applying for a job. Today we will share with you some of the conversations that have helped develop the thinking behind the campaign. If you're an employer, a disabled person, a person with a mental health condition, or a neurodivergence, this podcast might be for you. This episode focuses on common misconceptions about disabled people at work, including people's attitudes and assumptions, and how these can be addressed.
For me, the main misconception that I think is out there amongst most employers, I won't say all, it starts right from grassroots really, when you go in for interview, and sometimes you don't even have to open your mouth to greet them or answer a question that's given. It can just be in a look on somebody's face, and you can tell from that look that they're almost already thinking, my gosh, even if this person is who we're looking for, how are we going to deal with them becoming part of our workforce, and what extra effort is going to be needed from our side. So for me, that's the most common misconception, is that we're going to take extra work to blend in to the workforce, instead of looking at it that we all have differences in life and we've all got something different to bring to the table in whatever way, shape or form that might be.
I think one of the few misconceptions that employers have is that disabled people are more trouble than they're worth. They have this idea that if you employ a person with disabilities, that along with them come all these other host of difficulties, that you might need special adaptations, to just allow you to do your job, that are going to cost lots of money, that you may not be able to work as effectively as the other people. You might be slower in doing your job. We've spoken about this before. They view the wheelchair, or they view the disability before they view the person. They're building up in their mind all these excuses as to why you can't do the job, or why you won't be as effective as an able-bodied person to do the job, because you might be a health and safety risk, or you might not be very productive, or you're going to have a lot of time off, with hospital appointments or sickness. I think these are the misconceptions that we need to kind of break through.
From my point of view as a parent and an advocate trying to find work for my son, when we approach people, I think you often find that people automatically think that person's, that they can't do something, or they wouldn't be able to keep up with the work that has to be done. And then they would need a lot more help, which is sort of like, have we got time? Can we do this? The people in the workforce, if it's a small workforce, then are they going to have to be put on because the other person cannot do as much? That I think can be immediately off-putting and would come to mind very quickly. And I think some employers and other employees think that people are less able or less independent, or basically they'll just look at you and think you won't understand. Now, as a parent, I took my son to some small farm shops. He'd worked in a farm shop and on a farm at college, so we felt that might be quite a good place to start. We went into one place once, and we spoke to the butcher in there and sort of said, we're looking for my son to do a placement. He's on the autistic spectrum. And the butcher immediately kind of went, well, we have knives here. And we both kind of stood and looked and went, he has been used to the smokery and the shop at college, and it is a particular interest. Oh, no, I don't think that it would work, no. And that was the response that we got. We kind of quickly deduced that might not be the best place to work. And then another farm that we went to, the manager of the time was really good and said, yep, we'd really like to involve him and help him. And they introduced him into the work. I have to say, I think the one floor manager, his wife was on the spectrum. He understood. He was willing. The manager of the whole farm, I think he didn't like my son's sort of approach and the way he chatted to him. He was, I think, inverted commas, he was different. He didn't quite know how to cope. So when the line manager before left, he was quick to say goodbye to my son. So there are certain views from people, employees, employers, that I think until they've spoken to a person or had some information or at least given it a chance, the misconception is there.
Thank you. Thanks, Christine. It's going back to that point about everyone being individual, isn't it? Sharif, what do you think people assume?
All the above, accessibility, and just, the people that are on top sometimes just look like we don't want to make changes, or they don't have time to make changes, so they just kind of brush them things off, if that makes sense.
I know that from experience from one place when I went, well, I've been to a lot of places for interviews, but one place in particular, in the background, somebody who knew about disability rights, he said to the other guy, oh, don't even go there because it's a minefield and they've got more rights. And that put me off even applying for a job, even if there was a job there anyway. I thought, I don't want to go work for them anyway. That would put me off, and I think they think that you're in a wheelchair, that they can't do it. And they don't look at the person, and the fact that you're in a wheelchair, it's just like so frustrating because they're just not looking at you. And I've just lost my legs. That's it.
I think, again, a bit like everyone said, but I say it about most things, people just need to get to know us, because they'll meet us, and even the everyday Joe in the middle of the street will meet you and be perfectly fine to your face, but 2 seconds later you'll hear them talking behind your back. And it's like, get to know us. And again, in a job scenario, it would be get to know us before you make all these judgments about, oh, you're not going to be able to do that, you'll have to have that time off, we'll have to spend all this money on you. Get to know that that's actually the case.
I was just sort of thinking as you were all talking that, like, when did change become a bad thing? Like, isn't change within, commercial organisations, isn't that good to be able to be responsive? Surely, actually, the best organisations are the ones, and actually the ones that succeed are the ones that are adaptable. They can change their approach depending on, I guess we just saw it during COVID, didn't we? But actually, the real sign of a really strong organisation is that they are willing to, they're willing to change.
Like you say, that's a sign of a good organisation. I think we can probably all draw on a time where we worked for an organisation where a change has come in and, everybody is like, oh, I don't like this. I don't like what they're doing. It's not the way we used to do it. People get set in their ways, unfortunately. If you've never employed a person with disabilities or with a mental health problem, it's something new. It's like, I shouldn't have to learn how to kind of tiptoe around these people is almost the response. We never did it that way before. It can get quite infuriating, but, we can offer a lot to organisations. Sometimes without them knowing, we could be the best possible person to do the job.
And that's the point, isn't it, really? That's what it comes down to, I guess. What I mean by good as well is actually the most successful organisations are the ones that can adapt as well, aren't they? But I can't remember the percentage of people that are disabled, but disabled people make up the biggest minority group, and actually...
It's 1 in 5.
1 in 5, right, and that probably, huge, that's
18 million. No, 16 million.
Massive group of people that you're not involving in your search for talent, isn't it?
My 2 favourite sayings are, disabled people bite the hand that patronises, and the other one is, I'm sat on my arse, not my brain, talk to me.
So how do we address attitudes towards disabled people in the workplace?
What I harp on about before, it's if you have training, some job work experience with a company, and they can see what you can do before then offer a job or not a job, because then you can get involved with the other people, with the employers, and they can see that you're actually quite normal, really, if there is a normal.
Do you think it needs to be something that comes from the top, from the bottom, or right across the board when we're talking about changing attitudes?
I think it needs to be filtered all the way down, from the top right down to grassroots. And if you're not going to get a company that are willing, in whatever way, shape or form that might look like, to suit them as a company, if you're not going to get somebody that's willing to do that, then the attitudes aren't going to change across the board, because you could have CEOs that are saying all the right things, making all the right noises, but if you then don't filter that mindset down to the rest of your team, it's not going to work. And at the end of the day, it's the people at grassroots that need that support from mainly their team members, as it were, because they're the people they work with every day. So they need those team members to have a level of understanding, but also that level of understanding from those team members has to then go back through the management so that everyone is aware. So if there comes a situation where for whatever reason there's no management on a shift, your team leaders or just the team in general are aware of how to deal with any situation that arises, and as cases it becomes the norm or ordinary to everybody, and you're not feeling like you're sticking out in any way because everybody across the board is aware of what's going on and it doesn't become a big deal.
And just repeating what Annie said, it does need to start from the top, but it's not the people at the top that you're going to be working with day in, day out. So it needs to go right the way through everyone.
I think if your line manager is in favour of the person and is on the person's side, then he's able to take it back up or across the rest of the floor, sort of the people you're working with, to put the necessary needs in place. So yeah, I wanted to come back to one more point to add in. I think there is a point to say also that people that, inverted commas, don't look as though they have any disabilities often also have issues where people kind of forget that you have a problem, or if a certain job is given to you, it could exacerbate a need that you have. And sometimes attitudes, can upset people, or the way that certain things are said or done or not done. It needs the line manager and the people around you to just have in mind that they have on board somebody who has a disability or has a need as well. And I think when you don't look as though you do in any shape or form, it can get lost.
As you were talking about getting to know the person, there's the balance between whether we sort of train people in individual disabilities or not. But actually, if you get to know the person and how they tick and what they may or may not prefer in the workplace, then you're going to not go far wrong.
Because again, even if you get to know every single disability, every single person with that disability is still totally different. So again, getting to know the disability is one thing, but it doesn't mean you're still going to have to get to know each person you've got with that disability, because again, they're going to be different.
And it's much more, I think we've been focusing much more as well, haven't we, on the barriers. So actually this is not about the disability, it's about, I think as you've all been talking, actually, it's like really clear that there are just standard ways of working that we all just accept. We just accept because you kind of start working, quite often when you're 16, and actually all these things that are really weird and quite dysfunctional, and you just accept them because they're part of working. There's something about, isn't there? I mean, also the value of having a diverse workforce is actually they're able to say, this is a really weird way of working. Like, actually, this is quite, there might actually be a much more straightforward way of doing this. And actually, there is a barrier that you have inadvertently created. And I'm able to spot that because I'm, interacting with this workplace every day. So I think it's much more about, it's probably quite good to know about the Equalities Act, right? Like to know about people's legal rights, but much more about the barriers that we put in place just by not considering the choices that we make every day.
I think one of those barriers that we talk about that we don't often vocalise is time. Time's a massive barrier. We talk about the Equalities Act. The Equalities Act is now 13 years old, and it is designed part of it is designed to protect people with a protected characteristic of having a disability, to protect them in all walks of life, but especially in employment. And so many employers, as we've said before, disabled people, they've got so many rights. They've got more rights than able-bodied people. Well, that's not true. We need these laws and regulations to protect us. But as I say, 13 years on from when the Equalities Act came out, and we're still having to fight. So I think we say about we have to address this from the CEO down to the person that cleans the toilets. I think we just got to hit everybody with it. If you went to the CEO of Sony, let's say, a massive corporation, they probably would have no idea how many disabled people work for them. Probably couldn't tell you their names. Might be able to say, oh yeah, there's somebody I know, they're in a wheelchair. But they're just remembering the wheelchair, not the person. So as Christine said about, people not seeing these disabilities, if it's a hidden disability, unless you've got a piece of mobility equipment, a crutch, or, you've obviously got a prosthetic leg or an arm or something like that, it goes out of people's minds. And I think we have to educate businesses, organisations across the board. The HR guys, it's their job to know these things. And even then, often they still fall foul of it. They make mistakes.
How would we embed a good culture? So, how do you think we would? We
see in the TV programmes that we watch, more and more people with disabilities are popping up. In EastEnders, you've got Rose, who is deaf, completely deaf. You then see in other TV programmes, you people in a wheelchair or whatever the disability might be. They kind of in soaps they take a disability of the month and then they run a story with it, I guess. But having that presence for me, I think, will kind of get people used.
Like media representation, really,
exactly.
Or representation generally.
Yeah,
I agree. Sharif, did you have something you wanted to?
Like they should have more training in the work with the staff around working with people with disabilities. Because I know there was a place in Stroud that took people up for a couple of weeks with disabilities, and it was off key how they put the person to work and the things they were saying, and he was obviously learning difficulties, Down syndrome and autism, brilliant guy. He's been over the Stroud Gazette because he works in a few charity shops, but they just didn't know what to do with him in this place. Pulling him pillar to post. You take him. Oh, he's a bit freaky today. So just to educate you know, the workplace. Like one workshop once a year for a couple of hours, you'll learn a lot from this type of training.
But again, isn't it about looking at the barriers and actually then, because once you've removed the barriers, actually it's up to that person to decide where they want to work, isn't it? Yeah. Then you've opened up this like huge world of work just by examining all these things that you know, that sort of were standard. I wonder how many people actually even identify as disabled people, because actually, you know, we're now talking about people post-COVID. You're talking about long COVID, for example. How many people with long COVID would identify as being disabled and then also having that characteristic protected under the Equalities Act, and then think actually that they would then be able to ask for an adjustment at work? So again, is it just about normalising asking for adjustments, and it's, you know, and actually it being nothing to do with your long-term health condition?
I think you're definitely right, Jessie, in the fact that I myself have got friends who I've had the conversation with, and they've said that in the workplace, particularly since COVID's been around, they feel that there are adjustments that they need within their workplace, but they feel a sense of pride in the fact that they don't want to admit it because they don't feel that they're disabled enough, to use their words, and they don't want to take away from a society that's already struggling to support their quota of disabled people, which in a way I love my friends for, because it means that it's their way of looking out for me and my other friends that are already within the system. But in another way, I also think that nobody in society should be made to feel that way. And if somebody feels they need an adjustment, they shouldn't ever feel like their need isn't as great as somebody else's.
I think there's sometimes a fear that when you're working, if you're having a problem, that if you mention it, it might be the beginning of the end of your job.
I mean, none of us asked for it, regardless of what our disability may be. You know, given the option, if we could keep the free parking and the bus pass, maybe. But most of us would be, I'd happily not be visually impaired. I'd happily not have to use a wheelchair. I'd happily not walk with a limp. But we don't have a magic lamp, and we can't change those things. But what we can do is hopefully change people's attitudes about us. And hopefully, you know, improve things for both ourselves and for other people out there that, you know, may not be able to voice it like we can here.
And I think that's a really good point. And also what you were saying as well about, you know, people thinking whether they're disabled enough. And you mentioned, Christine, invisible disabilities. And there's something about levelling the playing field in a way that actually if we can remove barriers for one person, we're removing them for, you know, many more, more than just that one person, because we don't know how someone's, you know, ability day to day, how it affects them. We can't tell that by seeing. So it's almost like opening up this idea of disability, moving away from the stereotype of what you can see to thinking of it in a much broader way.
Again, thinking outside the box. We, as a group of disabled people here, I'm sure, have always been told, and maybe on times think, that we do think outside of the box, but that's because we've had to overcome our own barriers in life and to move our lives forward. But from my perspective,
they're not our barriers. They're not our barriers. It's the barriers that they put in front of us.
Yeah, I suppose. I'd never looked at it like that.
We don't put these barriers in front of us.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that when you have a blue badge, they now say not all disabilities are visible? I don't know whereabouts it says it, whether it's a car sticker or in the car parks. And that's a good point.
It's very good, yeah.
If they can do it on blue badges, why can't they do it in the workplace?
I think also people don't always understand that a lot of disabilities are fluctuating. So what you can be on one day or 1 week can actually change the next week. And of course, it's getting people to understand that point and to be able to assess your need against their needs, against the work needs, but not put it on you as it's either disbelief or inconvenient. And I think sometimes you can feel that as somebody who has a fluctuating disability. People I work with are lovely. They often say to me, you could be lying on your deathbed, Chris, we'll still bring you in. we'll put a mop or a duster in your hands, and you could just wave it as you're trying to flag us down. But because they like me, but that's because we're a good team and we do work very well. And I think that's the important thing is finding a team that is really on your side and that will help. And actually, when I think of most of my team, most of us have got something that will make a good day or a bad day. And have issues, and that's why I think we probably get on. The bigger the team you are, I think you can sometimes have difficulty getting around everybody to understand. On the other hand, if you're a very small team, say you were like 2 or 4 in a shop or something like that, it then becomes an issue, because if you're not well and you're one person down, you've only got 3 other people to cope. So it's a difficult.
That's a staffing issue, though.
It is a staffing issue, but it then becomes like an issue for either the manager to cope with your disability, or it's the person with the disability could feel, I'm really sorry, I'm letting you down.
It just goes to prove that disabled people work harder and have got more stubborn. And resilient to tasks, and they will get things done no matter what.
Tenacity.
I am. Yes.
Yeah.
I think we should make up a traffic light system for all disabled people, so you can have like a red, amber, green, depending on how good a day you're having. I'm having a bad day, so red. I'm having a good day, I can do a little bit more.
Badges,
Yeah.
Isn't that thing you said, Wayne, about, disabled people being experts in their own experience, which is obviously why we're all here as well, isn't it? And actually it's just about normalising asking people as well. Is there something as well if you do the opposite of not making something standard and you make something really hard to access, I just wonder how much that has an effect on people's attitude as well. So like you were saying, Annie, that some of your friends don't feel like they would want to access support because actually maybe they don't feel disabled enough. So I just wonder how much that affects attitudes as well. You kind of, if you don't make things readily available, you make that process really difficult.
Yeah, I think definitely it does. From my experience with my circle of friends and family and the people that I know, it definitely does affect attitudes, because they also feel that the systems currently in place judge you on the level of disability or how ill you feel. For example, I have a family member at the moment who is sadly having to apply for benefits, and she is feeling really under the microscope and really scrutinised at the moment as a person, because she is having to go into such detail about how things affect her day-to-day life, and she feels that she's having to go too far to justify her need for help off our social security system.
Well, these forms, you have to word them in a certain way, don't you? It's because word it in the negative way of what you can't do, not what you can do.
Yeah, because I've been helping her with the whole process, and as part of that, I've been in contact with the CAB, and basically the advice that the CAB gave to me to give to my family member was make sure you use the buzzwords on your forms, because if you don't use those buzzwords, they won't take the application seriously.
We could use these buzzwords to our advantage, though. We've spoken about a disability reasonable adjustments passport as a possibility that, people with a disability, with a mental health challenge, could have this piece of paper, this document that would explain to an employer what kind of reasonable adjustments would help them to do their job. So, by using these buzzwords, as we say, I understand the whole process of applying for PIP is massively dehumanising, but we can kind of flip that, and we can try and make the best of this. It's not going to change the system. We know the system's broken, but we can harness what there is and turn it into a positive. So I think the introduction of something like a reasonable adjustments passport. There are currently the NHS use a healthcare passport, which is an easy read document that would allow you to show any healthcare professional, dentist, chiropractor, chiropodist, your GP, whatever it is, what kind of things would make your visit to that healthcare professional easier. So it might be that you need to have a quiet space because you can get overwhelmed. But even the NHS don't shout very loudly about these healthcare passports. So, these things are out there. I've seen apps that go along the same sort of lines as a reasonable adjustment, so you can kind of detail what might make life easier for you. But I'd say the government has to bring something out, but we all know that even with the disability confidence scheme, the government doesn't really push that, and that's their own scheme. So, there are barriers again, but yeah, something like that was rolled out across all industries that became the norm, I think would be beneficial.
And again, it comes back to it being standardised, doesn't it? Like, you standardise these things, you don't make the application process difficult, you make them really easy to apply for, you really promote them. So Renishaw do a really interesting thing, actually, where they do an adjustments roadshow. So you're not only saying, actually, these are the things that could make your work easier. It's like, these are the things that we really want you to take up that are going to make your work easier. And actually, I guess, just making things really visible and really easily accessible. It's going to change attitudes, isn't it?
So to round off, what's the one thing that everyone wants employers to take away? If you could have one thing you'd like to say to employers, what would it be?
Just give people chances.
Try us.
Don't assume. Don't make assumptions.
Same as the above.
We're a person first before a disability. Give us a chance.
It's funny because the job I got in Gloucester Services, they actually, part of the final interview is you had work experience doing the job you'll be doing. So in the morning I was stuck in crisps all day, but I was talking to the manager. Then I had an interview 70 hours afterwards. I knew then what I could do, what I couldn't do. And he purposely put the boxes right up high on the thing, and he knew that I couldn't do that. But I stood through, I pushed through the kitchen and stuff, and I managed to get through, and I was stacking crisps all morning. But he could see I could do it.
And you got the job. Congratulations. Yeah.
I think employers need to realise that just because that's the way you've always done it doesn't mean that way was ever even the right way of doing it. We said about, assuming. Don't write somebody off before you give them a chance, really. They have no idea, and we don't either, but they have no idea we might be the best person to fill that role. And they're just taking face value, judging a book by its cover. And, they just need to, as everyone said, take time, give us a little bit of reasonable adjustment, if you will. We might just prove you wrong.
We've got the biggest employers in Gloucestershire who are taking part in a learning programme and really actively engaging in a learning programme. That has been co-designed by this group of people. And who would be better to co-design a learning programme about disability in the workplace? And it's been really they are engaging so well in the learning. And actually I think there's loads of energy around it as well.
I think it'd be a bit naive and maybe even a bit arrogant if an employer, an organisation was to undertake something like this without including people with disabilities. We say that all too common used phrase, nothing about us without us. And it's true. If you're not going to include people with disabilities in the discussion, then I'm sorry, you're not going to get the answer to the question right.
As Wayne said before, I think in life over the years we've all been told never to judge a book by its cover, and I think in this case it's really important, and just give us a chance to prove ourselves, and we can show you exactly what we have to offer, and that we are worth being part of a team. We do have different gifts as individuals to bring to each role, and I think that by not letting us into a team of employees, employers are missing out, because we do have a very different way of looking at things and a different perspective, and I think sometimes we're all very quick to say that change isn't always good, but I think in this case, because of where we are in the world and how far we've already come, I think we need to keep changing, keep evolving, and try and make the world as good a place as it can be for the next generations.
This team has proved that diversity works. We're a mixed bag of nuts, let's be honest, and we've proved it. So I think we can show employers that having that diverse workforce gets you the ideas, gets you the inspiration for things that you might completely miss if it wasn't for having that mix of different backgrounds, different experiences. I say we're really proud of what we've put together here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Empowered Employers podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the campaign, you can visit empoweredemployers.co.uk or contact Barnwood Trust on 01242 539 935.